Typhoon Streams. I'm your host, Tyler Springs. Great to be with you this afternoon as we get into a little bit of basketball conversation with the Memphis Grizzlies and Memphis Tigers having a couple of staff changes that I think are going to really shape the way they perform here in the 2024-2025 campaign. Really looking forward to talking through those with you. It's been interesting that they've both sort of happened during the same summertime. You know, we've come to expect, unfortunately, a little bit of staff turnover from Penny Hardaway and company. Not quite as much for Taylor Jenkins. I think this is his first time really shaking things up in a huge way on staff. Not that he hasn't had to adjust before, but this has been certainly a full-scale overhaul. We're going to detail those things here in a second. But if you like this channel, if you like the content I'm putting out, I'm going to keep trying to put it out at least twice a week here going forward. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, or if you want, go on Twitter, like the tweet that this video is going to be in. I appreciate you joining us live, but if you're inclined, go on Twitter once it's posted and go check that out as well. By the way, Twitter doesn't tell anybody about your likes, so your privacy is not going to be necessarily violated there. But if you're even more willing than that to go further and share this with other people, retweet. Feel free to send this to other people that you think hearing it and that you like, and hopefully you'll bring them into the chatter. I got some feedback on my Zach Edey post that I threw up about Kevin Pelton's estimates for him after the NBA draft first round a couple of weeks ago. Love seeing the feedback there. I'm going to try to get back to that as well. But today, want to focus on the staff changes, not necessarily Summer League or recent additions. Get to some of that tangentially. Obviously, for the Grizzlies, they're seeing a lot of new playmakers. Jason March won't necessarily be the coach that we talk about most today. But let's start with the Memphis Tigers, because they're a team that I think in the last couple of years has been more paper tiger than anything else. They're a team that has not necessarily performed up to people's expectations. Started off hot this year with Penny Hardaway's club. David Jones, Javon Quinerly, doing damage against Virginia, against Clemson, against some really, really big-name teams month of December. And then it fell off. For being honest, it was a lot less than the sum of its parts, and that was disappointing for a lot of people, especially those who thought the addition of Naquan Tomlin was going to take that team to another level. That's not the way it went. So I think came away from the season reasonably disappointed, and I certainly understand why. They're going to look for a lot of production replacement from the likes of P.J. Haggerty, Tyrese Hunter, Colby Rogers. We'll get to those guys. But Penny, over the last couple of years, has done a lot of chess piece moving around, shall we say. Guys in different roles, something that we expect. Certainly, coaching staff and roster-wise, and certainly roster turnover has been considerable in the last. People would say, and I think I would say, this year maybe he's trying to measure his additions to the roster a little bit more, whereas I think past years, and maybe last year in particular, felt like he was going to go after the best guy every single position. On the surface, sounds great, but I think in practice, maybe comes away with a lot of too many mouths to feed, or lacking an awareness of how the team fits together. And again, it's hard to know how this team, right? Like, that's hard for any coach who is recruiting the transfer portal hard. Some of them just treat it as a business and expect 18 to 22-year-olds to come in and perform with hiccups, very little transition time, that kind of thing. It's not always the case, right? So I think Penny Hardaway's done a decent job of going to get some high-level guys and some other guys who know they're mid-level, but might get a little more shine on a high major, at least a near high major opportunity, Memphis and else. Even if the roles, the shots, the minutes are some of those guys. But when you look at the things that people talk about for this Memphis team and the reasons why they change up their staff, they let go of Andy Borman, who they brought on, as a guy with Duke ties, a guy with AAU ties in the New York area, and I think it was hard for people to see where the value of his tenure came in. I don't want to speak personally to what his responsibilities were or were not, but you don't get the sense from Penny that this one guy or that one guy has his fingers on this particular button or puts his stamp on this particular area of the team's play or coach. Borman being let go opens the door for some new hires, and you're going to see hires throughout the staff, right? I mean, they're going to have a new director of ops, strength and conditioning coach, new director of analytics as well, and all those things behind the scenes do make a difference for what you're looking for in terms of strategy, game to game performance, conditioning, that kind of thing. Everything does play a role. But when you add two, not one, but two college head coaches to your staff, I think that's Penny Hardaway trying to kind of shore up the dam a little bit, put some sandbags around that would protect against water flowing over it, to the point where something would overwhelm him. It seemed the way last year's team, clash of personalities on the roster in a lot of ways, kind of overwhelmed him at times. And I think when you add more and more head coaches to your staff, they can talk about the different environments that they've been in, the different rosters they've had, how they have gone through interpersonally solving problems between teammates, coaches, that kind of thing, and getting teams to play together. You can question the records a little bit of Andre Turner and Mike Davis, particularly in the past couple of years, but what I'm going to lean on today are historically where they've come from. So let's start with Andre Turner, right? Obviously well known to Memphians and to Penny, but in his last 3 years, his first 3 years coaching in the NCAA ranks, 3 years at Lane College over in Jackson, Tennessee. Shout out Hub City. It's tough to coach not only at the Division II level, but to coach an HBCU at the Division II level. And not as though Andre Turner had blow away success in that program. 37-48 over his 3 years. I don't think he won more than 15 games any of those 3 years. But that's a program that has had trouble winning. To be fair to him, hadn't won more than 15 games since I think 16 and 17. And also has only had 1 year where they won 20-plus in this century. So I think that tells you the difficulty of the job that Andre Turner took on, especially with a program coming out of COVID. What he did do was develop a style, and I think I appreciate that more for Andre Turner, and I will do so for Mike Davis a little bit in a minute. But it's defensively where you saw, I think, Turner's expertise, but also just his fine-tuned attention to detail go out. Those Lane teams, even though they didn't win more than 15 games in any of those 3 years, they did rank in the top 20 of Division II every year in turnovers forced. They also ranked in the top 80 of Division II in field goal percentage defense and scoring defense every year. So that tells you where Andre Turner's focus is. It's certainly been on the defensive end. Now, people will have their qualms with that style of play, and they say, look, that's not difficult. That's not hard basketball to coach, quote unquote. That's just a matter of getting guys to play hard, putting pressure on the ball, and putting pressure on shooters. Yes, there's some truth to that, I think. But when you do that year after year after year, and you can recruit to that and not lose any essence of that defensive approach, I think that shows you that there's a buy-in, at least on one end of the floor, from the team, and also a developing expertise on one end of the floor from your team. So I like the fact that Penny says he's always been a defense-first guy. He wanted to bring in coaches with a little more experience, something that would maybe help them stabilize the roster. Again, don't want to put words in Penny's mouth, but this is kind of what I'm looking at when I see him go and hire a guy like Andre Turner. It's familiarity with Turner, the fact that he has respect for him, obviously having seen him coach a little bit at the Division II level, but also the fact that he has leaned into an identity, and that identity is defense for the Memphis Tigers. So that Lane program that he coached, they were consistently terrible shooters on defense, but what they did do over the course of his time, building from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, they got after it on the boards. They were offensive rebounding ranked 158th when he got there the year he started. They were 71st in offensive rebounding the second year. They were 23rd in offensive rebounding the third year he got there. So certainly, even though they were not a good shooting team and consistently were that way, they made up for it, or at least they did their best to make up for it on the offensive glass. And that built year upon year. So you're going to look and see that there were some things identity-wise that Andre Turner leaned into both ends of the floor there. Obviously, you're going to hope that the Tigers are a much better shooting outfit than those Lane teams, which I think were consistently in the 280th group in Division II. There's only 294. Tells you they were always the bottom shooting-wise. But again, his focus was on defense, and I'm hoping that he is going to get, obviously, experience, trust of Penny Hardaway, and those defensive principles taught and installed for the Memphis Tigers, or at least to the degree that they help in what Penny Hardaway ultimately at the end of the day, Penny's vision. When you go to Mike Davis, one-time very hot young coach, back in the early 2000s, guy who took over at Indiana and had some success there, had really good success at UAB for a while, had some success at Texas Southern, and then has had kind of an up and down tenure of late, more down at Detroit Mercy, which again is a very hard place to win. He went 60 and 119. That's 33% win percentage at Detroit Mercy. 6 years tends to be the length of the tenure for Mike Davis overall. At that length of time at a couple of different schools. But when you look at what his track record was before Detroit Mercy, a job that he took in part because his son was going to be able to play for him, he won 56% of his games at Texas Southern. He won 59% of his games at Indiana. I think he won over 60% at UAB. So this is a guy who has proven that he can win at different programs. And Detroit Mercy, though they didn't win 20 games in his tenure, they were able to win it at different times during this century. Unfortunately, he only won 14 games. He did it twice, but that was the high water mark. Mike Davis, son Antoine Davis, was after the scoring record during his tenure there. This past season was especially poor for Detroit Mercy. But I want to try and speak to not what kind of program the Titans are, or who they were specifically in 2023 to 2024, but kind of the coach that Mike Davis is. When you look at the best seasons that he had with Detroit Mercy, 2021 and 2022, those are the 2 years that he won 14 games, they were consistently an offensive-minded unit. 2022, 60th in the country in scoring. They're 22nd in free throw percentage. They're 11th in three-point percentage. They're 8th in three-pointers made per game. 17th in three-point attempts. 8th in offensive rebounding, right? So this is clearly a team that makes its bones on the offensive end of the floor. You go back the year before that, very similar numbers. Again, 7th in the country in three-pointers made per game. 24th in three-point shooting percentage. 14th in free throw percentage. 44th in three-pointers attempted. So this is a team that loves offense, right? Because that's the way Davis felt he was best able to put a team on the floor that was going to be competitive, and they did it twice to the tune of 14 wins. 14 wins is not awesome. It's not, especially in the Horizon League, not awesome. But it is showing you where he comes from a principal standpoint. You also see he had offense in his stint at Texas Southern where he was strong, right? Go back to those Texas Southern teams, 2014 and 2016, when he won 20-plus games. 2016 team, 3rd in the country in free throws made per game, 5th in free throws attempted, 71st in free throw shooting, right? 2nd in the SWAC in three-point attempts, 3rd in the SWAC in field goal percentage, 1st in the SWAC in offensive points, or I should say scoring offense points per game. 2014, similar, 9th in the country in free throws attempted, 27th in free throws made, led the SWAC in field goal percentage, 2nd in free throw percentage, 2nd in scoring as well. So this is the yin and the yang of the additions that Penny Hardaway is making. He's trying to add Andre Turner for defense, trying to add Mike Davis for offense, but he's adding both of them together to try and give him some head coaching experience, ultimately going to help out how he and Rick Stansbury run the bench. So that's going to have 3 guys on the bench, and I think this is the first time it's been that way, where it's 3 guys on the bench, 2 is left, who have all coached at the Division I or Division II level in the head coaching role. And I think that can only help in terms of where Penny shapes his program this season. Importantly, I think getting Davis, a guy who knows offense and can certainly cultivate offense, right, the way he has in a couple of different programs, is important because when you have guys like Colby Rogers, P.J. Carter, Tyrese Hunter, P.J. Haggerty, those are all guys that are expected to make an impact offensively. We talk about Carter a little bit, just added this week from previously a commitment to Rice, had played at UTSA last year. Only one season really playing meaningful minutes at the Division I level. Spent 2 years at Campbell where it didn't really get a lot of run, but at least saw some outside shooting, right? So hopefully the idea is you stretch the floor a little bit with him, with Colby Rogers, maybe not necessarily on the floor at the same time, but those guys certainly as a kick-out option really help the offense for the Tigers, using a little bit of spacing. We'll also look at guys like Tyrese Hunter and P.J. Haggerty, who have been known to go to the bucket. Haggerty more than most, probably one of the most prolific drivers in all of Division I basketball. And the way that Mike Davis likes to get shots, he's leaned into what's important about the modern game, right? three-pointers and free throws. We don't have to hammer that. People know, I think, the efficiency numbers there and how they correlate based on what you do on the perimeter and at the free throw strike. But that's something that Mike Davis has harped on with his teams that have been successful over the last decade or so at two different programs. And I think having weapons like Haggerty and like Tyrese Hunter, guys who are a threat to go to the basket, but also provide a little bit of shooting touch. Hunter, I think, has a little more shooting touch in there, so to speak. I think you haven't yet seen the high watermark for Tyrese Hunter's shooting. At least that's the hope. That's what Memphis is betting on. Maybe Haggerty, still at this point in his career, is primarily a driver, not going to threaten anybody by spotting up from three, but he's got to make one or two here or there, keep people honest. But I think the important part is Mike Davis is brought in for offense. You're recruiting a coach to your staff because of the players you have recruited in the transfer portal in the hope that those guys will pair together well. That's Mike Davis coaching the likes of Hunter and Haggerty and Rogers and Carter, the other contributors offensively for the Memphis Tigers. Defensively, you're hoping that Andre Turner can stabilize what you have hung your hat on for the last couple of years, even though his performances as the head coach at Lane were not that great. Hammered forcing turnovers, and he hammered field goal percentage defense. If you put those two coaches together and let them blend on your staff with the know-how of Rick Stansbury and Penny Hardaway's confidence in his guys, hopefully that approach, Penny Hardaway's professional level demeanor, he goes about things in the program, that can be a boon to the Memphis Tigers for their 2024 season, because people certainly expect a bounce back from what they expected in 2024, spring of 2024. Was not what was promised to them in the fall of 2023. Alternately, the Memphis Grizzlies also switching up a lot of their coaching staff after a year where admittedly they missed more games due to injury than any team in the league. Sometimes people look around and say, well, it's not fair to punish coaches for a team that didn't win because they were without so many of their key players for such a long time. But at the same time, part of coaching is getting more than is expected out of kind of backups or role players or guys who have to step in spots where the real guys, the lead guys are not available. And I think that's partly what Taylor Jenkins has done here, overhauling his staff, trying to get more out of what they're doing. When you look at what the Grizzlies did this year, obviously they did not finish anywhere near what people wanted them to. Partly that's because of injuries, Adams, Morant, other guys as well. But there was, I think, a lot of talk about what the Grizzlies needed to do better. The fact that they were just firing up threes at an incredible rate compared to previous seasons, and the fact that a lot of those threes, unfortunately, did not go in. They were kind of banking on them going in, and many of them didn't, and that's partly why they ended up with the record up with. But defensively, a lot of what Memphis did was very consistent. You look back at the numbers year to year between this past season and the season before it, in terms of pressure on the ball and trying to be a team that makes the other team uncomfortable, I thought you saw some consistency. Defensive end is not really where they struggled, right? The last two seasons, they were third in steals last year and third in blocks in the Western Conference, right? 2 years ago, they were eighth in steals, second in steals with 8.3, and first in blocks with 5.8, right? That's, I think, obviously supported by Jaren Jackson's presence, interior defender, and a guy who can also switch out on the perimeter. The defense is not all on Jaren, right? If that were the case, I think you'd see considerably lesser marks for the Grizzlies. But in terms of what you're talking about with ball pressure and making shooters uncomfortable and challenging shots, certainly seeing that from the Grizzlies defense. Not the defense that I think Taylor Jenkins is seeking a fix for. It's the offense. That's why he turns to a couple of guys who may be kind of unknown to Memphis Grizzlies fans, which is okay. But I would say that they are going to be known certainly by the end of the season for better or for worse. Hope that the Grizzlies see some improvement. So, offensively, right? What were the issues all year for the Memphis Grizzlies? It was not necessarily defense. It was shooting of every kind, particularly from the perimeter. But you needed better three-point shooting, and you needed better scoring at the rim. I think those are the two things that you think about for the Memphis Grizzlies. And again, it hurts not having their normal personnel in there. John Morant, Steven Adams, but they struggled in those areas. And in the modern game, like we talked about with Mike Davis a minute ago for the Memphis Tigers, you need good outside shooting, and you need better and better shooting at the rim, right? If the rim is the most efficient place to finish your shot, you got to be good at the rim, right? If you go to the rim and you take that shot just because it's a high percentage shot, fine. But if you're not any good at making that, what's the point? So you go and make some changes on your staff in pursuit of better offense, right? They were last in the West in scoring, last in the West in field goal shooting. Were fifth in the West in three-pointers made because they hucked up so many. They were 14th in the West in three-point shooting, 34%, right? So see all those things. Yeah, they were fifth in offensive rebounding. Some of that is kind of supported by the fact that their shooting was just so terrible. They were second in offensive rebounding 2 years ago when they were a considerably better offensive team. They were also 14th in the Western Conference in assists per game, 12th in turnovers per game. You know, that comes down a little bit from Morant being such a good steerer of the offense, Tyus Jones backing him up 2 years ago, where they were 7th in assists and 5th in turnovers. And what you're seeing at the rim, I think, is where you see the biggest difference. They've not been a great team even over the last 2 years of getting great shots at the rim, and some of that's on Ja, just for the level of aggression he has going to the rim, and I think the risks that he takes because he knows he can make some shots that others can't. But also, I think as a general outcome, right, the percentages drop for the Grizzlies because Ja will often take a cavalier shot that a lot of other players wouldn't take at the rim. But the point is trying to get easy looks at the rim, right? So the last 2 seasons, Grizzlies were last in blocked shots allowed. In other words, shots blocked by their opponent, right? They were last in the West in that category. 2 years ago, they were 12th in the West in that category. So when you have 6.5 shots blocked by your opponent per game, that means that either you're forcing shots at the rim where there really isn't a good opportunity, and because you've run out of time or the defense has positioned themselves well, or they're coming out and challenging shots, and you've got some guys who are releases or slow releases, or just the play that is happening is telegraphed. They can anticipate it and be in the right spot in order to defend it. So you're trying to get better looks specifically at the rim, but if you get better looks at the rim, you're also going to get better looks consequentially on the three-point line. Kick-out threes are super important because typically they suck a defense in and they leave a shooter open. Didn't have very good three-point shooting last year, no matter who was on the ball or wasn't on the ball. But it's one of those things that they need to improve. Right? Again, look at the fact that they chose to be a team that got the lowest percentage of points in the Western Conference on twos last year, second lowest in the mid-range. Right? That's a choice. That's not necessarily an outcome because they're bad. It's a choice that comes from them trying to be efficient and go to the three-point line more often than not. But they also didn't shoot it well at the three-point line, as we said. They had their second worst field goal percentage in the Western Conference in the restricted area. They were the second worst field goal percentage in the Western Conference in the, shall we say, north paint, the paint above the restricted area, and they were second worst as well in the mid-range where they shot below 40%. So when you look at those and you pair it with the fact that they were last in the Western Conference in corner three-point shots, 34% from the corners. That's despite shooting a lot of wide-open threes. Right? Got the third most wide-open threes in the league, 21 per game. They shot the third fewest wide-open twos per game. That's 2.6. Now, what difference does that make? The difference that makes is if you're going to have more opportunities at the rim, you got to make those shots, right? They may lean on this philosophy that they've had over the last couple of years, typically last year, where they're going to just take way more three-point shots than going inside. But you're going to have very, very scarce opportunities at the rim. You've got to make them, right? So either you've got to have your opportunities at the rim go up because you don't have very many of them, but it's supposed to be a high percentage look, so it's supposed to be automatic. Either that or you've got to get cleaner looks at the rim so that the ones that don't go in and more cleaner looks at the rim, like additional cleaner looks at the rim, so that if you miss, occasional bunny, you easily get a putback where you make two where you would have missed one. If the opportunity volume. So that's sort of the push-pull for the Grizzlies offense is, yeah, they shot a lot of threes, but they also didn't have a lot of twos, and the twos that they had, they shot poorly on. So the automatic quote-unquote buckets that are supposed to be available readily to an NBA offense were not there for them, and they were also last in the Western Conference in corner three-point shooting. Where do we see kickouts go most often these days? It's not as though you're driving downhill, from above the break and throwing it back out behind you. Driving downhill, and typically you're kicking either left to the corner or right to the corner. Can't sink a three-point shot, you're going to struggle offensively. So getting things right at the rim and getting things right on those kickouts to the corners, it's a matter of personnel. It is. There's certainly that. That's why you draft a Cam Spencer. That's why you draft a guy like Jalen Wells, and you've seen a little bit of those guys in Summer League. Probably what you would say why you draft a guy like Zach Edey, right? Making a higher percentage of shots in the restricted area. So you address those concerns from last year's offense with new personnel, but you also address them with new coaches. I'm not going to speak to deep background on these coaches, but just what I've read and what I want to continue to try and read about these coaches is Tuomas Isalo is the first ever Finnish coach, I believe, to be hired into the NBA, but he came from track record of success, right? Coaching Paris this year, great success, and a guy who's thought very highly of offensively, known for pace, known for three-point shooting in his offenses, known for crashing hard on the offensive boards. That sounds like, in a bottle, a very good recipe for the Grizzlies, and kind of one that's been familiar to them, because if they can get the three-point shooting right, they've done the offensive rebounding pretty well over the past couple of years. And you feel like they've had a pretty high-tempo pace in the last couple of years as well when they've had success John Morant on the floor. You can have your disagreements with Zach Edey, and can he play at a high pace? Has yet to be seen. Although I think in Summer League you have seen him run the floor capable. Over the long term, you're looking, where the Grizzlies are going to be. They were 11th in pace in the West last year. They were 6th in the West pace 2 years ago. Hopefully, Tuomas Isalo can be a guy who kind of turns it up again in terms of pace, but also helps the Grizzlies get more open looks, not just at the rim, but also corners, so that their three-point attempts can be a little bit more certain, if you will. Part of that, again, is personnel, having guys out there who can make those shots. But going after the guys that they went after for player development, look at guys like Noah LaRoche, Boylan, guys who hopefully, I think are well thought of in the player development circles, but they're certainly going to have to heighten that up. Guys who are coming in, look at the guys who are fresh to the Grizzlies, right? Jalen Wells, Cam Spencer, Zach Edey, but also guys who are not as fresh, who have been stagnant, to some degree. The Jake LaRavias, P.G. Jacksons, the Zaire Williams, Santi Aldamas of the world. A lot of that is still TBD, but clock's ticking on those guys, and some would say, well, the clock was up on those guys. But I think you get this staff, this new staff, in service of giving those guys at least last chance to say, hey, we put multiple coaches around you, and you can't develop into the player. Then perhaps you're just not the player to be. But at least Taylor Jenkins and Zach Kleiman, I think, probably had a hand in this. They have reshaped the staff this year in pursuit of the Grizzlies, trying to get not only their current players developed, but also to change things. Guys like Scottie Pippen has to take over a starting point guard role, right? Want to look and see, all right, can we find a way for our offense to hold up? He's in there, if Ravia is in there or Jackson is in there. They have scored, those guys have scored well at times. You want to have it consistent, and you want to have it be, A, easy at the rim, B, just you want to be more sure of it at three-point arc, something they had not been able to do last year. That certainly raised their level of play, not just with the starting unit, but also especially bench comes in and has to give some offensively. That complimentary basketball, the load as well. That's my quick take. I'm going to try and be investigating a little more Tuomas Isalo word throughout the month of July. I'll do it publicly. Try and back after Summer League is over and we've gotten a look longer look at Wells and Spencer and some Fallow might bring to the table again. It was Jason March coaching the summer league team and Fallow, but interested to see what he brings and get some help from Patrick saying Bucks were a team. They were, a high-paced team. They were second in the conference in three-pointers made per game. So, seeing, I think, identity, right, leaned into by Taylor Jenkins and hey, we got to gin up some offense here. That, if need be. Appreciate you guys watching this Typhoon Streams episode. We're coming back tomorrow with another good one. Hope you'll join us for that one, but make sure you like or subscribe or comment. Feel free. You can also send me an email at typhoonstreams@gmail.com. And if you want, go on Twitter when this video gets posted up there. Feel free to follow my page and like this, or if you feel so inclined, retweet this, because trying to build a following, it's going to be, slow, but I appreciate those of you who are sticking with me, and I want to actually encourage the discussion. I think you guys are smart enough to certainly contribute, having watched a lot of Grizzlies and Tigers basketball, and want to hear what people are thinking. So feel free to hit me up, and thanks very much for watching.